First, I pray to the Almighty to bestow upon me His truth, His wisdom, that I may be worthy of conveying His message, and that we should be able to, through this, sanctify His name and bring peace to His name, as God's attributes is shalom, peace. So, first of all, I'd like to thank you personally and for arranging this. I'd like to thank the school, your professor, and for allowing us this privilege, and all the students of the class for listening. And with an open mind, with God's help, I hope that you'll be able to grasp and understand, and with hope you'll follow and accept what we're saying. I'm only asking, though, that you should. It should be an opening, an opportunity to be able to look further into this issue, because it is different. It maybe is unique, different than the perspective that you usually get from the media, and so it's something that makes a person take pause and would really it would be required to really study the subject better. The issue is, of course, the state of Israel. Nakba, what they would call that in Arabic they call it the occupation of the Holy Land, the occupation of Palestine. Of course, this is unfortunately a tragic and an old of many years. It's over 65 years, the existence of the state of Israel and the existence of this movement of Zionism, which is the ideology of creating a so-called Jewish state, is over 100 years. It started in the late 19th century. There was the first meeting of the Zionist. It was in Switzerland, and that took place in the 1890s. And they started. There was this idea that Judaism should create their own state, a safe haven, a place where the Jews should have a land for themselves, an army, and so forth. Now, with God's help, what I would try to explain here and show that this flies in the face of what a Judaism is, of what it means to be a Jew, and what the Jewish people, true to Judaism, at the time that Zionism came about, what their opinion was of this. It happens to be that the vast majority, almost in its entirety around the world, opposed this concept of creating a state, a Jewish entity. It only changed later as the momentum after the Zionists came up to Palestine. They started buying land, and eventually when they were ratified by the United Nations, there was the Second World War, the Holocaust. That is when they really were able to get a grasp into the Jewish, even some of the religious communities, that they were able to get a foothold. And why that changed from what it was originally, I'll explain with God's help. But first, let's just understand what Zionism is and why I'm saying it's different than Judaism. Judaism means a religion. Judaism, as you're well aware, is a people that are practicing a certain religion. What is this religion? It is it is over 3,000 years where Jewish people made a covenant on Mount Sinai with God. The descendants from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob stood on Mount Sinai. Moses took the Torah, it's called the Jewish, the Bible, from God on Mount Sinai, and the Jews accepted to be subservient to God and follow the rules strictly. That is in the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the words of the prophets. That is what Judaism is. Nothing else, nothing less, nothing more. Judaism is subservience to God, to follow the edicts of the Torah. Zionism is a transformation of this religion of subservience to God into a nationalism, into taking the Jewish people and saying that we have to have a piece of land, we have to be a nation as any other nation. We are a material concept. It is, we have to have an army, an Olympic team, we have to be a proud nation, and it really is taking God out of the equation. In other words, it's not really pivotal or required whether you are religious or not, as long as we are a cohesive nation, a people together, we have our land. That is the identity of Judaism. This is totally contradictory to what Judaism meant for these 3,000 years, what it meant to be a Jew. Judaism, as I said, if a person followed the rules of the Torah, he was practicing a Jew. Yes, if a person is born from a Jewish mother, he's required, he can't free himself from being Jewish. But the fact is, Judaism, what it means is one thing, to serve God. Zionism says no. It means to keep ourselves together, to have a nation. And it only started, it's relatively new. As I said, it started, let's in the 1890s. In Basel, Switzerland, they came with this movement called Zionism. Then they decided they'll create a state. Where will they create the state? They looked for something that was convenient. They were thinking of Uganda because they were trying to release themselves from any connection to God. So they didn't care. They were mostly irreligious. And their concept was to make something a practical land, a fruitful land. So there was a lush land. They were thinking of Uganda, next to Argentina, Patagonia. That was different concepts. As you can, if you follow their meetings, what they had, the Zionists in the beginning of their movement. Later, they decided that it's practical, even though it's not a good land, but they would go to Palestine to make their state because it has very crucial issues to their movement. They would be able to use the concept that God gave the Jewish people the land on Mount Sinai, promised it to the Jewish people, and we could therefore tell the world, and the Christian believes that there's such a thing, that God spoke to the Jewish people, and He promised them the promised land, so they'll be able to tell the world, hey, this was given to us by God, we have a deed to the land, we have rights to the land. So they would be able to sell this, and sell the emotions of it, because the world at large believes, many of the believe in one God and believe in the Torah, that the Jews have a Bible, the 5 books of Moses. So they'll be able to sell this concept to the world and get support, because you need massive amounts of money to create a state, to have your own state. So they'll be able to get backing from both non-Jewish people and from Jewish people. They'll be able to tell them, hey, this is the land that God promised us, that 2,000 years we were wandering around the world in exile, because if you most probably you know that the Jewish people are considered people in exile. Around 2,000 years ago, the Jews had been living in the Holy Land for a time, and they built the temple. King Solomon built the temple, but then it was destroyed, and the Jews were driven into exile, into Babylon, let's say Iraq today, and different places. And since then they're wandering. They're called the wandering Jew. And they could. So the Zionists said, we'll play on the emotions of all these Jews. We'll say, we've suffered so much anti-Semitism. We've had so much suffering. Now we can finally gather ourselves together, return, and create our own home. And that way they'll get a lot of massive backing, support, money to be able to build a land, which without money you can't build a land. They'll be able to build their own homeland. So they decided to pick Palestine for the land, not because of religion as a whole. Now it happens to be that this concept is contradictory to all what it says in Judaism. Why? Because first of all, as I said, the whole concept, the whole essence of a Jew is not to have a land. It's to be subservient to God. That's first of all. Secondly, the concept of our ending this wandering Jew, of returning and making our own entity, is clearly forbidden according to the Torah, the words of God. King Solomon built a temple. At the same time, he was a prophet, and he said in his prophecies, called the Song of Songs, the book of King Solomon, he told that God warned the Jewish people, when there will be the destruction of the temple, when you will be thrown out of the Holy Land, you'll be spread around the world, I'm putting you under 3 oaths, that you should not attempt to return en masse in very large numbers from around the world. You should not, secondly, you should not rebel against any nation. A Jew is required to be a loyal citizen in every country where they're residing. Thirdly, the third oath is do not make any attempt to return, to end the exile that God decreed. In other words, we believe we were driven from the land with the destruction of the temple around 2,000 years ago, not because we were physically weak, because the kingdom of David, the house of David and the Jews in Israel and the Holy Land were weak. It happened because it was a decree of God. And if you follow the prophecies, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, these are all books of the prophets that the Jewish people are bound by. It's part of the Torah. They kept on warning the Jews as prophets from God that being that we're not on the very high level of holiness, of spirituality, we will be thrown out of the land. And that happened, it culminated with the destruction of the temple. So that happened 2,000 years ago. So for 2,000 years, Jewish people around the world accepted that we are forbidden because we respect that it's God who rules the world and forbids us to end exile. What are we doing? We are waiting. We pray to God every day for the day when God will make a miracle that the whole world will change, that all the world will accept there's one God, there won't be any more atheists, there won't be any more immorality. The world, one day, we believe God will make a metaphysical change, a miracle where all humanity together will recognize one God, we will all embrace and serve God in harmony. That is all the Jewish prayers. If you look in the Jewish prayers, that's what we say every day, and we pray for this, that the nations should join together, and it will be a glorification of God's name. Then we believe, and only then, God, without any human intervention, will gather back the Jewish people with the will of all humanity. We will return to the Holy Land, and God will rebuild the temple. God himself will rebuild the temple. Till that day comes, we don't know when that will happen, but till that day comes, we have to wait patiently in every land that we're residing, whether it's in Russia, whether it is in Canada, the United States, in Iran, wherever it is, the Jewish people have to be loyal citizens and serve God, keeping the Sabbath. That's the laws of Jewish laws, kosher and family purity, the laws of Judaism. We have to keep strictly, and we did this for around 2,000 years. So therefore we never attempted to make a state. Now, the fact is that Zionists were mostly irreligious, as I've mentioned earlier, and they detested the religion. They were looking for an ersatz, another type of Judaism, which is a shell. Only the outside, it will be called Jewish, but they won't have the obligations of a Jew. So what they wanted is a nationalism, a material concept. And this was opposed by all the rabbinical authorities worldwide. They opposed this, and until, as I say, after the Second World War, they started gaining a foothold in the Jewish community. Now, one other issue is here that's very, very important to speak about, and that is, I left out a very big issue, and that is they decided to go to the Holy Land to make their state. Now, the Jewish people, as I said, are under the bounds of the covenant to God to keep the Torah. In the Torah, it's replete, full of words of how we're not allowed to steal, we're not allowed to kill, we're not allowed to do harm to others, love your neighbor. There's so many things. It's all, we have to be, emulate God. Just as God is compassionate, we have to be compassionate. The concept is, so the concept of creating a state where it would be affecting another people. In other words, they decided to go to the Holy Land, where the majority of people were non-Jewish, who were residing in the state. The inhabitants the vast majority were Muslim, and then there was a Christian community, and the smallest community, there was tens of thousands of Jews, but it was the smallest community. Those Jews, this community residing amongst, together with all the rest of the inhabitants, mostly Muslim. Now, to create a Jewish state in such a land will be, inevitably, we would have to be stealing and treading on the rights of the inhabitants. And of course, that's forbidden. The Torah says you're not allowed to steal or kill. Now, the Zionists waved the Torah, the Bible, as a deed and a right to take that, because God gave it to us 3,000 years ago. But the rabbinical authorities, the chief rabbi of Palestine, and we have all these records, all their documents that I'll be able to show you with God's help, the chief rabbi of Palestine pleaded with the United Nations, and it's in the United Nations records. We have it. You can look it up yourself. The traditional, they said that we do not want a Jewish state. I'll just quote one line of the chief rabbi of Palestine in 1947. Remember, the state of Israel was ratified, was created, given the rights to exist in 1948 by the United Nations. Now, the chief rabbi of Palestine in 1947 pleaded with the United Nations. His name was Rabbi Dushinsky of blessed memory, and I have the pictures in our books. We have the meeting where he went to the United Nations. And basically he pleaded with the United Nations, and he said, I'm quoting one line, he said, "We furthermore wish to express our definite opposition to a Jewish state in any part of Palestine." This was the view of the Jewish religious people, the ones who are true to Judaism, and the leaders of the Jewish community. And the rabbis speak out, 130 years records of religious Jewish opposition to Zionism. It shows the world, around the world, all the Jewish leaders from every type of Jew, European Jewry, Sephardic Jews from the Middle East, from Africa, all the leading Jewish rabbis, everybody said, I'm sorry, this is against our teachings, and Zionism is a heretical movement, people who are trying to rebel against God, because the Torah says, do not attempt to leave exile. It's a punishment of God. The concept of our being dispersed amongst the nations is because we were not up to par, and God sent us out to the lands, as the prophets told us, to break our haughtiness. There's a second issue that of being spread out amongst the world is to be able, if we're ideally serving God properly, will be a light unto the nations. In other words, that people will see Jews who are constantly praying, doing good deeds, that we should be spread out amongst the nations. But it's God's will, and we are expressly forbidden to create our own sovereignty. This is Judaism 101. So Zionism flies in the face of what Judaism is, and Zionism, which is the ideology, I forgot to mention, Zion means Zion, means Jerusalem, the city of David. And so when the Zionists, these people, nationalists, decided to create their state, and they decided to pick the Holy Land, they started using Jewish symbols, not because they were religious, but because they needed, as I said, this backing of the world. So they started using the Star of David on their flag, the menorah, and different Jewish symbols, and they put on this facade of religion, claiming God gave them the right. Our leaders around the world stood up and said, we oppose the mere existence of the state of Israel, and we oppose on all these facets, because we can't have a state and we can't oppress the people who are living there. So what's happening to the Palestinian people, the Jews around the world cry, and we feel the suffering of the Palestinian people, because it's done in our name, and it's killing, oppressing, and it has no legitimate right, according to the Torah, according to God, to exist. So we pray every day for the speedy and peaceful, God help us, without any more suffering to people, dismantlement of the state, so we can once again live together in a harmonious community, as we did in Palestine for hundreds and hundreds of years, and as we did in Muslim lands. And I hope that will be preface. Again, all these are on our site, MKUSA. You can read it. There's many booklets and different things. You can follow it, and you can always feel free to ask us questions. Now, I hope that can answer questions if you have what you would have.
Yeah. Why did the Zionist movement gain so much popularity if many Jews believe that it was not right to return to Israel?
Well, with God's help. First of all, as if you know, Judaism, the religious Jews, the Jews who are true to the Torah, unfortunately, is maybe 10%. I don't know the exact number. The ones who are following the Ten Commandments, not to desecrate the Sabbath, to keep the Sabbath, not to travel in cars, the Sabbath, and all the laws of the Torah, which is what it means to be a Jew, are upheld only maybe by 10% of Jews. Unfortunately, Jews went through a lot of trials and tribulations, blood libels, and of course the Holocaust. But let's regress, because the Holocaust was only 50 years ago and Zionism started earlier. But most of the Jews, even prior to the Second World War, were non-religious, and therefore they were mostly not knowledgeable of the laws of the Torah, and they only knew one thing, that they're spread around, and here's a movement that emotionally plays on the hearts, the strings of the heart, and says, hey, we're going to be able to have a safe home, we're going to have a safe haven, we're going to have a national home, we're going to be a proud nation, and as I said, the majority will reform. Reform means they're going to reform God's words, they're going to change the Torah, reform Jewry, which you can't change the words of God, that's not the covenant. So basically, they were able to play on the emotions of these people and gain a lot of support around the world. Now, this was prior to the Second World War. The Jewish religious world around the world stood fast and steadfast against this concept. By the Second World War, the Nazis destroyed almost all the European Jewish communities. They killed around 6 million Jews, or whatever the number, or more, or whatever it was, and because this whole issue is about many people weren't registered. The point is, though, that the first people they killed, as Stalin did in the Soviet USSR, is they first killed the educators, the leaders. So they massacred the rabbis, the teachers, and the Jews were left leaderless. After the Second World War, they were in displacement camps, they were in refugee camps, and they had seen so much suffering. And here the Zionists got from the United Nations a right to a land. The Jews were sitting in camps and without a place to go, and technically, I mean, they were able to go. At the end of the day, let's say my father's family was killed in Auschwitz, and I could go on and on. All these people eventually went to different lands, to England, communities built, especially here in New York, United States. But the Zionists took that opportunity, and they even manipulated that they should get these people out of these camps to go to Palestine. And they had a vast amount of money. They promised them land. They promised them a home. So they were able to ignore, by ignoring the words of the Torah, and by using the fact that the Jews didn't have their leaders, and say, you see what happened if you follow the Torah? You see what happened? Here, we're giving you a home. We're giving you housing. We're giving you an opportunity that you take a gun, you'll protect yourself. And they even used a lot of blasphemy, which I'm sure you can hear if you ask a Zionist. They'll say, where was God by the Second World War? In other words, like God is weak. Where was God? Therefore, we're going to take a gun in our hands, we're going to protect ourselves. So they used the concept of the Second World War as a most pivotal issue in being able to gain the backing of many Jewish people. Using these concepts, that is how they were able to build support for their state, and using the concept that the Arabs hate us, the Muslims hate us, the Muslims want to kill the Jews, they have an ingrained hate against the Jews, and building on anti-Semitism, which is abhorrent, because in truth, in time of, let's say, the 2,000 years that we were in exile, the Jewish people, let's say there was the Inquisition, times that Jews were people around the world were trying to be forced into converting to Christianity. So the Muslim communities, the Muslim countries, and throughout history provided a safe haven for Jews. And in Palestine, in Egypt, Morocco, Tunisia, Iran, all these lands, Jewish communities without any protection, without any United Nations to protect us, human rights groups to protect us, we flourished amongst them. But Zionists keep on harping on this and saying Muslims and Arabs hate the Jews, and they have an ingrained hate against us. So they use these fear-mongering and ignorance of the Torah to build backing and support for this concept of a state, and claiming that it's the will of God. And that's basically the story. There's much more, of course, depth to this, and I could show you the records of this, but I'm just giving you, again, overview.
These three prohibitions on return to the land on town, are they actually something that's in the Torah, in Jewish scripture, or is this more of a later tradition that arose after the Second Jewish Revolt and all that?
Right, with the help of the Almighty. This is the Torah is, give you a very brief, the covenant, what we have with God, is what Moses took on Mount Sinai, that's called the tablets and the 5 books of Moses. And this covenant that we made is to uphold, it's called the books of the prophets, the prophecies, the prophets, and that's called the written law. That's the books of Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah. It's prophecies from God. That's part and parcel with the 5 books of Moses. And then there's the oral law, which means that if you will look at the Torah, the 5 books of Moses has 613 commandments. And let's just say to keep the Sabbath. What does it mean keep the Sabbath? There's many laws involved in that. Every law has its branches and many parts of details of the laws, and it doesn't state them in the Torah. In fact, some laws of the Torah barely says, let's say Jews have to wear, it says tzitzos. Males wear something called tzitzis. It's on the corners of their clothing, but it doesn't say what that is. And orally, God explained to Moses what that is. And that was later written, so that there's a written law and oral law. Oral is what God gave to Moses and was later written down in the form of Mishnah and then later the Talmud. So a Jew who's a religious Jew means that he upholds the written and oral law. If not, then he's not a practicing Jew. Anybody who was a religious Jew will tell you that. Now, in the books of the prophets, the one prophet was King Solomon. And in his teachings from God, he wrote that God put us under the oath. It's a verse. It says 3 times the same verse as the prophet. The book is called the Song of Songs of King Solomon. And he said, "I've put you under oath, the daughters of Jerusalem, with the buck and deer of the fields, if you will awaken my love prematurely." Most of the prophecies are written in metaphor, and they're explained orally in the Talmud. The Talmud explains in the tractate because it's books. And one of the behind me, you can see there's the Talmud right behind me. Well, and there it explains the prophecies. And the prophecy of this, that I put you under oath, the daughters of Jerusalem, is that God said, when I'm going to send you into exile, because everything was written before, ahead of time, because it's a prophecy. Then I put you under oath, the deer and the buck. It says, with the deer and the buck of the field, daughters of Jerusalem, not to awake my love prematurely. The Talmud explains that it means 3 times it states this verse, stating that we're under 3 oaths. We should not return in mass. Don't awaken my love prematurely. Daughters of Jerusalem mean the Jewish people should not awaken the love of God by trying to end exile. This was never questioned for 2,000 years. Again, I said Jews had the opportunity to buy land. All the rabbis throughout the generations, it's the basics of Judaism. They said, no, don't even attempt it. And not only that, but it won't accomplish anything, because if you will attempt to end exile, you will only incur the wrath of God because you're rebelling against God. Judaism doesn't give you the freedom of picking and choosing what you want. That's what it means to be a religious Jew, because it's the words of God.